Miss. They are ranked in the top 10. They are 6-0. Their schedule has been light. And the question, Cole Kublik, Greg McElroy asked me this morning. When are we really going to know against Ole Miss? About Ole Miss? And I thought about a couple of different ways to answer it. Here's the first thing. I don't think Ole Miss, or any team like Ole Miss, has to apologize for how they win or who they beat. Your schedule is your schedule. Your conference schedule is determined by the league office. Your non-conference schedule is determined by you, but it's determined years in advance. We've talked about the fact that the Ole Miss-Georgia Tech game was scheduled, when Georgia Tech was coming off the Orange Bowl win against Mississippi State. They were really good under Paul Johnson. Georgia Tech's been a train wreck since then. Tulsa's a pretty decent American Conference program, year in, year out. Central Arkansas was an automatic win. Ole Miss had to work against Troy. Troy's a pretty decent football team. The two SEC games that Ole Miss has played so far, Kentucky at home, it's a pretty good win, right? I mean, is Kentucky less than what we thought they were? Yeah, Ole Miss had to beat Kentucky with a healthy Will Levis. And then Vanderbilt. So, is it a murderer's row schedule? Absolutely not. Should Ole Miss have to apologize for being 6-0 right now? No. And maybe here's a better question. So, going to the message that we got on C Spire a little while ago about Ole Miss and Mississippi State have traditionally found ways to lose games. Not every Ole Miss football team that has run onto the field in the last, never mind 115 years, but in the last 20 years, would be 6-0 with this schedule right now. It just wouldn't be. There are a lot of Ole Miss teams that would have managed to lose that game to Tulsa, that would have lost that game to Kentucky. So
that have lost to Vanderbilt. Recently.
So that's number one, but it doesn't really answer the question. So in terms of when will we know about Ole Miss, hear me out on this. If Ole Miss, and there are a lot of hypotheticals in this, but none of them are outlandish or unbelievable hypotheticals, okay? If Ole Miss beats Auburn by 17 on Saturday, do you feel like you now know? Or do you look at it and you go, that's a really bad Auburn team? So they could be 7-0, and you might go, well, that's a bad Auburn team. Let's say that LSU goes to the Swamp this weekend and loses by 2 touchdowns to Florida, and then Ole Miss goes to Baton Rouge next weekend, and they beat LSU by 2 touchdowns to get to 8-0. Do you really know then? Or is LSU just not very good? It's not a vintage. It's a first-year head coach. So maybe you still don't know. Let's say the following week, Ole Miss goes to A&M and they win by 10. Win by a touchdown. Win by 3. Whatever the number is. But they win the game. Do you know then? Or are we reminded that Texas A&M is not very creative offensively and they're bad at quarterback? And so you don't really give them credit. So they're 9-0 going into Alabama in this scenario. Now, let's say Ole Miss loses that Alabama game by 3 touchdowns after Alabama beats Tennessee this weekend. And they win whatever. Well, now, does that mean Ole Miss is bad? Do you really? No. It was number 1 Alabama. And then they get their open date, or I guess they had the open date before Alabama. They go to Arkansas, and Arkansas continues to be walking wounded. Maybe K.J. Jefferson's healthy. Maybe he's not. Ole Miss wins that game. But it was a depleted Arkansas. In this little exercise, you don't really know what Ole Miss is until they play Mississippi State on Thanksgiving night. Think about it. if you're going down the road of, well, they're 6-0, but we don't really know. Are they any good or not? They're 7-0, they're 8-0, they're not. If that's the logic that you're using, like, well, we really don't even know if they're any good because they hadn't played anybody or they beat teams that had a quarterback issue, or along the same lines of saying that Ole Miss doesn't need to apologize for its schedule, Mississippi State doesn't need to apologize for beating Arkansas without KJ Jefferson. It was an SEC win. Doggone it. If we find out after it's over that Will Levis was only 65%, but Mississippi State goes into Lexington and wins an SEC game, they don't have to apologize for winning that game. This has been a really fun season. It's a really strange season. And it's almost like, other than just we got to have something to talk about, I don't entirely understand some of the questions that are floating around. Well, we don't really know about Penn State because have they played anybody? They will learn more about them after they play Michigan this weekend. Does any of that make any sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I would say that a lot of what you're saying about Ole Miss is true. I will say if they lose to Alabama the way, we've made some "we believe" comments about Ole Miss this year. If they lose to Alabama the way State lost to Alabama that year, then we would know, okay, this team hasn't played anybody. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think they're going to lose. I think State lost that game by 31, 35, something like that. I don't see that happening, especially at Ole Miss, with the game being at home.
What if Ole Miss lost that game 45-24?
Yeah. I mean, that's a reasonable loss to one of the best teams in the country. I mean, yeah. You can't walk away from that saying, well, we told you they were crap. And you can't walk away from saying, I told you we were good. So, yeah, that's just what you're going to lose to Alabama by, probably. I mean, that's a good score prediction as we stand here, what is it, a month before that game. It's 1 month to the day before that game in Mississippi State at Georgia, or Georgia at Mississippi State. So I understand why. I feel like I see both sides. I understand why people have questions about Ole Miss. I have questions about Ole Miss. I think you have questions about Ole Miss.
Sure, I do.
But at the same time, to say that, well, they're not. You play who you play, and they've beaten up most everybody on their schedule. They have 2 close games. Against a Kentucky team that was ranked in the top 10, for whatever that's worth.
They're 7th in the country.
Yeah, and then Tulsa. I mean, if you want to call if there's such a thing as a bad win, sure, we'll put Tulsa as that's a ugly win. But teams win ugly games sometimes.
Yeah. C-Spire text line, the only sure thing in college football this year is that as long as C.J. Stroud is healthy, Ohio State is the best team in the country.
But even that, are we sure?
I say, are you sure?
I'm not sure about that.
They couldn't score against Notre Dame. Really struggled. I know it's the first game. That was a long time ago, but they struggled to move the football against Notre Dame. Struggled.
Brian says he's never heard of having to apologize for winning. Well, and I think that's kind of the point that I was making. You shouldn't have to, and yet there are so many detractors of teams. This is not. We're sitting in August with the preseason polls out and looking at Texas A&M ranked 6th or wherever they were ranked and going, you know what? I don't know. I don't see that. This is their halfway through the season. They hadn't lost a game.